March 2002. At a small grimy apartment in Wood Green, a forgotten suburban residence in North London, a fist hammers loudly against a front door. Raised voices from the other side demand the man inside to come and answer. Hearing no reply and no signs of movement from the other side, the knocking gets even louder, considerably more intense. A few prying neighbors peer out of their windows hoping to see the source of all the commotion. Those with a clear enough view quickly catch sight of a group of imposing figures dressed in the telltale high-visibility uniform of London police officers. The urgency of their knocking and the authoritative tone of their voices say it all. This isn't a welfare check on the occupant. Whoever they're looking for is in serious trouble. Eventually, the apartment's resident meekly opens the front door and emerges. His name is Gary McKinnon, 36 years of age, pretty unsuspecting to look at. A face in the crowd on any other day, barely bothering to wash or shave most days. After all, he rarely left the confines of his dimly lit apartment. Still, shut in as he may have been, McKinnon was hardly the kind of person someone would picture when hearing the words criminal mastermind. But on the internet, this seemingly ordinary-looking man led a completely different life. Operating under his shady online alias Solo, Gary McKinnon was responsible for one of the most devastating and high-profile cybercrimes of the early 2000s, possibly even in all of modern history. Under the noses of numerous authorities, McKinnon was able to uncover a way to access highly sensitive information, photos and records kept secret from every member of the general public, information he saw as proof for the existence of extraterrestrial life. In March 2002, Gary McKinnon was arrested in his North London flat, accused of hacking into computers and accessing data that was property of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, as well as classified intelligence that belonged to the United States military. He would spend the next decade of his life locked in a seemingly endless legal battle with one of the largest and most imposing forces in the entire world, the United States government. In this video, you're going to learn how one man nearly landed himself in prison for the better part of a century, all thanks to his own overzealous attempts to answer his burning question: how much does the government know about UFOs? Just what did Gary McKinnon find when he went looking for proof of alien life? And why did the governments of both the United States and the United Kingdom work so relentlessly to try to keep him quiet? Just how did this seemingly ordinary man pull off the biggest military computer hack of all time? Born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1966, Gary McKinnon moved to London when he was 6 with his mother and stepfather. In the years since, McKinnon has described his stepfather as having something of an interest in UFOs, and this had a direct influence on Gary growing up. He became a science fiction lover from a young age, believing in the presence of life beyond Earth. When a young Gary McKinnon received his first ever computer at the age of 14, he likely had no idea the skills he'd learned would one day paint a pretty large target on his back. The computer itself was an Atari 400, considered to be an entry-level device by the standards of the early 1980s, primarily designed for small children to use. But as humble of a beginning as it might have been, that Atari 400 enabled Gary to learn beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code, or BASIC, a general-purpose ease-of-use coding language. From there, the foundations had already been put in place for his future as the man behind the biggest military hack ever committed. Of course, nobody jumps from being a teenager learning BASIC to being an elite hacker overnight. So Gary made ends meet in the meantime, leaving school when he was 17 to work as a hairdresser. However, given his learned aptitude for computing, friends at the time convinced him to seek out a qualification in a field involving computers. After completing a course for a computer certification, McKinnon would start finding sporadic jobs in tech support, simultaneously using his technological know-how to earn some income, while also further honing his development skills for coding. There were, during his early life, a number of significant events and factors that directly contributed to McKinnon's fixations with both computing and the search for life beyond the Earth. The former is often widely attributed to the 1983 techno-thriller War Games, a movie that's credited with popularizing the concepts of computer hacking and bringing the idea of potential threats to cybersecurity to the forefront of the public consciousness. War Games follows David Lightman, an enterprising young hacker portrayed by Matthew Broderick. And in an eerie parallel to McKinnon's future, David ends up gaining access to computers belonging to the US military, unwittingly activating a supercomputer designed to execute a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union and threatening to start World War III as a result. While McKinnon's hacking escapades never ran the risk of sparking any conflicts between rival nations, it would result in a different kind of international battle. But even though it's not hard to see why people would associate war games with McKinnon, especially as he's admitted to having watched the movie while growing up in his local cinema in Crouch End, London, it's often cited erroneously as the inspiration that led Gary McKinnon to venture into cybercrime. But by McKinnon's own admission, the connection between him and war games is something of a red herring, meaning any information that's intended to deceive or distract from the truth. In other words, misdirection. In his own words, McKinnon's main inspiration wasn't war games, it wasn't even a movie, but a book aptly titled The Hacker's Handbook, written by Peter Summer, a British author and an expert in digital forensics who published the title under the pseudonym Hugo Cornwall. As the title suggests, the handbook itself details how the phone systems and early computers of the 80s could be hacked, with some editions even apparently containing printouts of actual hacking attempts, with confidential information like passwords redacted for the reader. The methods as laid out by the first edition of the Hacker's Handbook were so detailed that it was widely banned before being republished with a lot more sensitive details removed. But not before Gary McKinnon could glean a lot of information that he needed to get his jumpstart in the world of computer hacking. So why the search for UFOs? Surely you must be thinking it has to do with his childhood fixation on science fiction. Well, according to McKinnon himself, it goes even further. In an interview, he claimed to have developed an interest in unidentified flying objects, now known as unidentified aerial phenomena, through a close encounter of his own. While the story has never been corroborated by anyone, McKinnon claims that he witnessed a light in the sky at some point during his lifetime, although he's never elaborated as to whether this was during childhood or in his adult life. Being vague on the details makes it naturally hard to prove or outright deny his story. Whether or not this actually happened is open to speculation, and there's been some understandable skepticism surrounding this UFO incident. As often follows the stories of those who have also claimed to have witnessed alien life or seen UFOs in the sky for themselves. Some have questioned whether attaching himself to the idea of searching for UFOs and extraterrestrials was just a smokescreen deployed by McKinnon in order to mask his more nefarious hacking activities. But for his own part, McKinnon has stuck by his hunt for life beyond the stars, claiming he was looking for UFOs long before the 2000s. According to one of his statements, if I had wanted to distract anyone, I would not have chosen ufology, as this opens me up to ridicule. Say what you will about his methods, but the man clearly wants to believe that there is life out there in the universe. Around the turn of the millennium, McKinnon found work as a system administrator. Although he would eventually leave that job, upon finding himself unemployed, he would begin to conduct the cyber schemes that would make him infamous in the UK and the US. On September 11, 2001, the historical terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon shook the entire world, and arguably forever changed society as we now know it today. It might seem like a non sequitur, but believe it or not, 9/11 had a significant impact on not only the lives of millions of Americans, but also on one Gary McKinnon. But what's the connection? Was Gary's hacking activity somehow linked to one of the most devastating terror attacks in the United States history? Well, indirectly, yes. Between 2001, when the 9/11 attacks took place, and March the following year, Gary McKinnon was able to hack into multiple different computers belonging to the United States military and NASA, operating under the alias of Solo. By using the internet as his way in, he was able to identify computers on the US government's own networks that were running a Microsoft Windows operating system. According to McKinnon himself, his methods weren't all that sophisticated. He was purely using the simple tools that were available to him, primarily a cheap personal computer and a dial-up modem that only offered him 56K of internet connection per second over a standard phone line. For those of you born after the advent of Wi-Fi and don't know what dial-up is, we'll just say that connecting to the internet was a real hassle back in the 2000s. McKinnon performed what's known as a port scan, a technique that hackers employ to discover weak points within a network. Port scan attacks allow hackers to determine what information a computer is sending or receiving, or what active cybersecurity methods an organization employs, such as any firewalls installed on individual devices or being used to protect entire networks. His hacks followed three simple stages. The first being to identify which computers had Microsoft Windows present. Once he'd found which of the computers were running the desired operating system, McKinnon would then use a port scan to see if he was able to communicate with those computers from his own. finding any systems that were open that either didn't require passwords or access or were using default passwords, McKinnon was then able to install a backdoor software called Remotely Anywhere on the vulnerable machines. As its name implies, this program could grant him remote access to each computer that the program was installed on, allowing him to control these computers, including accessing any of their functions or their stored data at any time, anywhere, and all while avoiding detection. Once Remotely Anywhere got him inside a computer, McKinnon could view other devices connected to the same network and port scan them for vulnerabilities, seeking to gain access to them as well. The exact number of computers he was able to access is up for debate. When he was later arrested, he was accused of accessing 92 machines. However, charges later levied against him claimed that McKinnon shut down well over 2,000 computers, as well as deleting critical operating system files that stopped those machines from working correctly and blocked access for 2,400 users, all employed by NASA and the US military. During countless hours spent at his computer over many sleepless nights, McKinnon wreaked havoc throughout the US government's computers. His goal was to find answers, taking advantage of the more lax cybersecurity measures implemented as a result of the 9/11 attacks, to seek out any information linked to, you guessed it, UFOs. In his search to uncover whether or not we're truly alone in the vastness of the cosmos, McKinnon would alter the course of his own life forever and draw the ire of the United States government already on high alert in the wake of a massive terror attack. Initially, to avoid detection, McKinnon conducted his hacks on NASA's networks at night so that any strange activity on their computers would be less likely to be noticed. But the more he uncovered, the more bold and brazen McKinnon became, eventually growing overconfident in his abilities to the point that he started leaving hostile messages on the machines that he gained remote access to. "Your security system's crap," one message goaded, with another being an outright threat that stated, "U.S. foreign policy is akin to government-sponsored terrorism these days." It was not a mistake that there was a huge security stand-down on September 11th last year. "I am solo, and I will continue to disrupt at the highest levels." Of course, one burning question remains. After all this effort, did McKinnon even find the proof of the UFOs he was looking for? Well, yes. At least enough to confirm his own pre-existing suspicions. As far as McKinnon tells it, he found images of what looked to be otherworldly spacecraft. He describes downloading the files as painfully slow, as his dial-up connection would move at a snail's pace. Again, that was another common pain of using the internet in the 2000s. So much of the evidence was left on the US's machines. McKinnon asserts that he came across several high-resolution photos of UFOs that were being kept, he believed, in Building 8 of the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, NASA's main center for coordinating space flights. Based on some claims made by a NASA photographic expert, McKinnon believed that the space agency was regularly using photo editing software to airbrush UFOs out of high-resolution images taken by the satellites and stored at the Johnson Space Center. Investigating this for himself, using his self-taught hacking skills, he logged on to the NASA computers he had illegally accessed and started searching around the relevant department. According to claims he made during interviews with the press, while remotely accessing these NASA computers, McKinnon found a folder titled Unfiltered. Upon opening it up, he saw what looked like the answers he'd been seeking, contained in huge high-resolution image files that took him a considerable amount of time to download. Securing the satellite images was tricky with the basic tools at McKinnon's disposal. It's often understated how in just over 2 decades we've gone from having to download large files over a slow wired connection to being able to do so almost effortlessly, downloading photos and images from the internet wirelessly in a matter of seconds. Of course, our technology for viewing large image files like these has also improved since the early 2000s. So how was Gary McKinnon able to view the high-resolution images he stole from NASA? According to the man himself, he used his own remote access to NASA's computers to actually see the files he was stealing by manually changing the computer's display settings to a lower resolution and adjusting them to 4-bit color. He was able to view one of the images briefly. His testimony is the only description of the image we have, naturally, so the photo in question has never been published anywhere publicly. Whether or not he actually saw what he describes or was simply seeing what he wanted to is impossible to determine. As McKinnon describes it, though, the satellite photo showed a large, silvery object in the shape of a cigar with curved half-spheres on either side. As far as he could allegedly see, the object had no rivets or noticeable seams to its metalwork. leading him to assume that it couldn't possibly have been made on Earth or by human hands. It certainly didn't seem to resemble any man-made vehicle. That much was certain. It was hard to even gauge the size of the object thanks to the angle of the satellite image, which seemed to have been looking down directly at the unidentified silver object. Whether it was a prototype for some unidentified piece of spaceflight equipment or an actual alien spaceship, exactly what Gary McKinnon saw remains unknown. Using a Java application, McKinnon claims to have taken a screenshot of the image. But this too has never been seen by anyone other than him, as it was not saved into his temporary internet files. But at what he referred to as his crowning moment, McKinnon's activity on NASA's computer was discovered by an employee, and his remote access was abruptly disconnected. McKinnon's discoveries in his search for undeniable UFO proof didn't end at a single image, though. When he was probing, no pun intended, for more information, McKinnon describes coming across an Excel spreadsheet that was titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Reading through it, the hacker saw lists of names and ranks corresponding with members of the United States Air Force. The most curious part about the list was these names weren't listed anywhere else, not on any other computer or in any other files. There was no other record of these airmen and women being registered with the U.S. Air Force beyond this strange document. Digging deeper, McKinnon noticed that this spreadsheet also contained information about personnel transfers between ships. He took note of the names of the vessels mentioned and started to notice an alarming pattern. None of these ship names corresponded with any aircraft carriers or other military vessels that existed anywhere in the United States' arsenal. None of these were ocean-going ships. It was astounding. They weren't part of the Navy, they weren't part of the Army, and not even the Air Force. This led Gary McKinnon to the only conclusion left. These non-terrestrial officers and the mysterious vessels they were transferring to and from weren't even on the Earth. I was thinking they must be an off-planet space force or space fleet at least. It might sound like pure science fiction, but whether the spreadsheet of names that McKinnon saw was real or not, his statement did end up predicting the future. In December 2019, the U.S. Space Force was formally established after being signed into law under the United States Space Force Act. It's the smallest of the U.S. Armed Forces, with only 8,600 personnel, and the second most mocked, right behind the United States Marine Corps. Now, before we go jumping to any conclusions, it does seem like a bit of a reach to say that the alleged spreadsheet that Gary McKinnon uncovered was proof that the Space Force or another outer space division of the U.S. military existed. Some have speculated that what McKinnon discovered could have simply been a strategy game played using an Excel spreadsheet, or an outline of purely hypothetical situations. McKinnon himself has refuted these alternative explanations, believing wholeheartedly that the U.S. wants to establish military dominance over space. As if possible images of a UFO and a list of U.S. military personnel operating off-world weren't enough, McKinnon also claimed to have unraveled a vast conspiracy through his remote access exploits. He purportedly found among the computers he hacked his way into files that detailed the suppression of technology that could potentially provide clean, renewable, free energy to the entire planet. This advanced source of potentially unlimited power was, according to McKinnon, being hidden by the U.S. government in order to prevent the public from having access to an affordable, sustainable alternative to fossil fuels that have directly contributed to global warming and climate change. However, by 2002, with McKinnon becoming more brazen with his scathing messages and file stealing, his activity on NASA's computers had been noticed. Exploiting security vulnerabilities in the computer's operating systems and bypassing weak passwords had led to significant disruptions within the systems McKinnon had been accessing, and it didn't take long for the traces linking back to him to appear to those looking into what McKinnon had been doing. Details like his IP address, the fact that he used a former girlfriend's email address to sign up for a trial version of the backdoor software he was using, all pointed back toward a hacker in London being responsible for the biggest computer hack in U.S. military history. In March 2002, Gary McKinnon was arrested by British police and charged with hacking into highly sensitive U.S. military computers between February 2001 and March 2002, as recent as the very same month he was arrested. However, while you might expect McKinnon to be sent straight to jail and never be heard from again, the story was far from over. The U.S. Justice Department sought to indict him on 8 counts of cybercrimes in 14 states, accusing McKinnon of causing $566,000 in damages. McKinnon was also accused of stealing sensitive information, including system users' private account details such as passwords, as well as manipulating and deleting critical files, which left some of the computers he accessed completely inoperable. Gary McKinnon was facing up to 7 full decades in a United States prison and would have landed behind bars until 2072 at the earliest. However, and here's where it gets interesting, the U.S. Justice Department also wanted him to face trial for his crimes on American soil, and that haste to have the man behind the large-scale hack face justice stateside might have been the key that McKinnon needed to slip away and live as a free man. You see, the U.S. has a long-standing bilateral extradition agreement with the United Kingdom, thanks to an agreement signed in 2003. However, this particular agreement only came into effect after Gary McKinnon had been arrested. On top of that, he hadn't been charged with any crimes by British authorities, despite having confessed to the police who arrested him that he had indeed gained access to NASA and the U.S. military computers. This provided McKinnon's lawyers grounds to oppose the extradition proceedings, which UK authorities had given the U.S. the go-ahead to begin, effectively bypassing the UK's own legal system in favor of the American one. It was argued that the U.S. was seeking to make an example out of Gary McKinnon, a political action likely taken to hit back at this hacker for breaching their military systems. Keep in mind, in the wake of 9/11, America wasn't exactly keen on looking weak or vulnerable to attacks, and the fear that a lone hacker in a small apartment in London had managed to gain access to supposedly secure NASA files would have severely undermined the strong image the U.S. was seeking and still seeks to maintain. McKinnon and his lawyers were prepared to oppose any attempts to have the man sent to the U.S. During the extradition hearing that began in July 2005, over 3 years after McKinnon's initial arrest, Mark Summers, the lawyer representing the United States government, claimed that McKinnon had made a calculated and intentional attack against the U.S. government by gaining unauthorized access to the computers he hacked. McKinnon was, in the eyes of the U.S. Justice Department, trying to intimidate them. Over a year into the proceedings, May 2006, Bow Street Magistrates Court in London reached a ruling that Gary McKinnon should be recommended for extradition to America. However, the courts could only offer a recommendation, not an outright grant for extradition. This was an outcome that McKinnon and his legal team had expected, and it now meant that the decision on whether or not he'd be sent to the U.S. lay with the UK's Home Secretary, John Reid. 2 months later, the Home Secretary approved the U.S.'s request to extradite the hacker. But McKinnon wasn't done when it came to opposing the ruling, and launched an appeal to the UK's High Court to overrule the decision made by the Home Secretary. His lawyers even argued that the move to the U.S. would breach McKinnon's human rights. In April 2007, the High Court dismissed the appeal case, but McKinnon and his legal team were not deterred, took the case higher, arguing against the Home Office's decision in the House of Lords, one of the most powerful sectors of the British government, able to directly affect the legislation and the law that governs the entire country. What was interesting was that McKinnon had, in 2003, rejected a plea offer made by the U.S. The terms of this agreement would have seen him serving only a light prison sentence of between 6 months and a year, housed within a low-security penitentiary on American soil. The more lenient sentence would have then been followed by a safe transfer back to the UK, where McKinnon would have had a further 6 months of parole. Considering the gravity of what he'd done, that could have been a win-win for McKinnon and the US government, seeking to make an example of him. But Gary turned down the plea deal, convinced that once he arrived in the US, the American government would go back on the agreement and instead just send him to Guantanamo Bay. Given what he found relating to UFOs, or claimed to have found at least, Gary McKinnon felt that he was on a moral crusade. He never claimed any ignorance to the fact that hacking the US government computers is super illegal. In fact, he freely admitted to being guilty of the charges levied against him by the US. But on principle, he fought back against the extradition request, believing that the US and its intelligence agencies had access to crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft, and they not only found a way to use that technology to create a clean energy source free from pollution, but that they were also keeping this information away from the general public. Now, the cynical or legally minded among you might ask, maybe all this talk about UFOs was just something he used to cover his crimes. None of McKinnon's supposed findings have ever been made public, and while he vehemently stands by his story, it's entirely possible that this was a strategy put in place by his legal defense, perhaps to convince the public and the courts that McKinnon was unfit for extradition and standing trial in America. He was told to make outlandish claims about alien technology and suppressed secrets. This could have been done in order to paint McKinnon as someone who seemingly innocently poked around in NASA's computers because he's just a crazed conspiracy theorist who got in over his head. Whatever the case, it makes you wonder, was Gary McKinnon after more than just pictures of UFOs when he hacked into those machines? If this was just cover for his real crimes, then it would explain why the US government was so adamant about extraditing him. In June of 2008, the legal team representing Gary McKinnon argued to the House of Lords that to allow the hacker to be extradited to the US would be an abuse of proceedings. They claimed that the American government had made threats of life imprisonment against McKinnon, with a potentially lesser sentence depending on whether he cooperated or not. Once again, though, the appeal against the extradition was rejected, and the House of Lords accepted the case made by the Home Office, that no threats had been made against McKinnon. Still, though, he wasn't done fighting back and continued to push back, taking the case to the European Court of Human Rights. Remember, the UK hadn't made their ill-informed decision to leave the European Union yet, so they were still subject to EU law. But still, you already know where this is going. Much to his dismay, McKinnon lost his appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. His lawyers had tried everything to defend him against extradition, revealing that he'd recently been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which can not only cause difficulties with social interaction but also can present itself in repetitive patterns of behavior. Lawyers also argued that because his crimes were committed on British soil, any prosecution brought against McKinnon should, as a result, have come from British authorities, not the US. In September 2008, McKinnon and his lawyers made another appeal to the newly appointed Home Secretary, Jackie Smith. Yes, their battle against the US government's extradition had gone on for so long that John Reed was no longer in the role of Home Secretary. However, Smith still ruled to permit the extradition, so a different Home Secretary did little to change Gary McKinnon's fate. Then, in January the following year, McKinnon, who had already openly admitted to being guilty of hacking into US government computers, signed a written confession. Naturally, even though he'd confessed to his cybercrimes upon his arrest, the US couldn't convict him while he was still in the UK. But signing this written confession wasn't done to appease the American government, who were still out to put McKinnon in prison. It was done to spite them and to attempt to further prevent him from being extradited. By signing the confession and taking culpability for his actions, McKinnon was opening himself up to the possibility of facing trial in the UK, where there was a chance any sentencing passed would be far more lenient than the US. The Crown Prosecution Service started to consider the option, and shortly after, McKinnon also filed a judicial review on the basis that extradition would put his health at risk, owing to his Asperger's. In February 2009, the Crown Prosecution Service refused to bring any charges against McKinnon. They acknowledged that there was enough evidence that McKinnon was guilty of obtaining unauthorized access to classified documents, and that would normally mean he'd be facing a criminal trial in the UK for that charge. According to the Crown Prosecution Service, the evidence they had found didn't reflect the criminality that the US was alleging McKinnon of. Still looking for a way to avoid extradition, the hacker was met with another rejection when he sought permission to make an appeal to the UK Supreme Court, the highest authority court in the UK. The case was deemed as not having sufficient public importance to warrant the Supreme Court's time. However, the Home Office would place a temporary hold on the extradition while they assessed psychiatric evidence surrounding McKinnon and whether his health would be endangered by being sent to the US. This wasn't quite the stay of execution Gary McKinnon and his lawyers hoped for, as in November 2009, Home Secretary Alan Johnson, yes, there was once again another new Home Secretary by now, announced he couldn't block the extradition on medical grounds, as the US authorities had made assurances they would take McKinnon's needs into account. Still, undeterred, McKinnon and his lawyers fought back, presenting reports highlighting that US prisons wouldn't be equipped to deal with someone under McKinnon's circumstances. In May 2010, McKinnon's lawyers made yet another appeal to the Conservative government's Home Secretary. Yes, another one, Theresa May, who agreed to adjourn the case and potentially put a stop to the extradition process. The case was even discussed by Britain's then Prime Minister David Cameron and US President Barack Obama during a visit to America by Cameron. Eventually, it was Theresa May, then Home Secretary and future Prime Minister, who would permanently block the extradition request in October 2012. It was left up to the House of Commons Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, to come to a decision on whether or not McKinnon could face prosecution in the UK. Within 2 months, the answer had come back as a resounding no, since the chances of a conviction were deemed not high enough for the case to be taken to trial. Gary McKinnon spent 10 years battling against extradition. That's 9 more than he would have spent in a US prison if he had accepted the plea deal offered to him. Who's to say if he really saw proof of alien life, whether to avoid losing his cover or because he really does believe he is stuck unwaveringly to his story? Regardless, the hacker who pulled off the biggest military computer hack in history walks out a free man. Like the truth, Gary McKinnon is still out there. Now check out U.S. Special Forces confession, "I recovered crashed UFOs," or watch this video instead.